Some books are not just read, they are felt like a quiet earthquake beneath our feet. Picture this. The screen is almost dark. A slow, low sound builds in the background. We see a crowded city, lights in tall windows, people rushing home, delivery riders, office workers, night shift nurses, security guards, screens glowing in small rooms. Everything looks normal. But the book we're talking about tonight asks a very simple, very dangerous question. What if this normal is not neutral? What if the way people work, get paid, rest, dream, and argue is not just how things are, but the result of a hidden struggle? Not a struggle of good people versus bad people, but a struggle between groups, between classes, between those who own and those who sell their time. Tonight, we're going to walk slowly through a book that tries to pull that struggle out into the open. The Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. This is not a fan video, this is not an attack video. This is an attempt to understand one thing. How does this little book try to change the way we see power? And more quietly, does it still succeed? Stay with me. Most of us grow up with a certain story about society. It goes something like this. People are mostly free. If you work hard, you can move up. Some people have more, some have less. But that's mainly about talent, effort, and maybe a bit of luck. History is the story of great leaders, big inventions, and random events. In this common story, power is something you can see. It's in laws, in rules, in titles. Power is a job, a boss, a judge, a general, a billionaire. You can point at it. And if someone is unhappy, the usual answer is, try harder, change jobs, study more, vote differently, be patient. Now, this book pushes back on almost all of that. It suggests a different lens. Instead of seeing history as the story of individuals, it says, history is the story of class struggle. Not always loud, not always violent, often quiet, but always there underneath. The book suggests that the way we work and produce things, the way we get paid or don't get paid, the way property is owned, the way ideas spread, all of this is not neutral. It argues that behind beautiful words like freedom, rights, opportunity, there can be something else hiding. Relationships of power between classes. In simple terms, between those who own the factories, the land, the machines, the money, and those who must sell their time and energy to survive. Where many people see the economy as a natural landscape, like weather, this book sees it as built, designed, shaped by human decisions, habits, and past conflicts. Where many people see opinions as personal, this book asks, who benefits if people think this way instead of that way? So the big clash is this: common belief. Society is mostly fair, mostly open, mostly about individuals making choices. The book's challenge: society is structured by class. And class shapes which choices are really available. You don't have to agree. But if we want to understand how power is described here, we have to follow that thread. The Communist Manifesto is a short text written in the mid-19th century by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. It is not a calm academic book. It's sharp, urgent, and written like a political firework. But under the loud language, there is a simple project: to describe how they see the modern economic system, to explain how it creates specific classes with conflicting interests, to predict where this system might lead, and to call for a new form of social organization. We're not going into a long history lesson here. No dates quiz, no biography list. What matters for us is this. Marx and Engels are looking at a world that is industrializing fast. Factories, machines, long working hours, crowded cities. They see a new kind of system taking over older ones. Old rural life is being broken up. Traditional crafts are replaced by mass production. Families are pulled into wage labor. This book is their attempt to name what is happening. They call that system capitalism, and they describe it as a revolution in how we produce and live. But more importantly for us, they try to show how power moves inside that system. Who gets to decide what is produced? Who owns the tools, machines, and buildings? Who has to sell their labor to survive? And how do those positions shape ideas, laws, and even morality? In this video, we'll slow down two big ideas: history as a story of class struggle, how the ruling economic class shapes the ruling ideas. Then, we'll step into an imaginary story, pull it apart, and come back to our own reality. The first core idea is simple to say, but very deep. The history of all societies up to now is the history of class struggles. Let's unpack that in plain language. Class here doesn't just mean rich and poor. It means groups of people defined by their position in the economic system. For example, in older systems, there were landowners and peasants. In some eras, there were masters and slaves. In feudal times, there were lords, vassals, serfs. In modern industrial life, Marx and Engels focus on two big groups: those who own the means of production, factories, machines, capital; those who must sell their labor to live, workers, employees, wage earners. In their language, these are bourgeoisie and proletariat. We can just say owners and workers. The claim is, across history, whatever the specific names, societies are split into classes whose interests don't fully match. One class benefits from keeping things as they are. Another class could benefit from changing things. These tensions may be open and violent, or quiet and hidden in rules, customs, and daily routines. But they are always there, like pressure in the ground before an earthquake. Let's use a very simple example. Imagine a factory that makes shoes. There is a person or group who owns the building, the machines, the raw materials. A group of people who come in, use their time and energy to run the machines and get paid a wage. Now, the owner wants to make a profit, so they want high productivity, low costs, enough sales. The workers want decent wages, reasonable hours, safe conditions. At first glance, this looks like a normal business relationship, but look more closely. The value created by the workers' labor has to be more than what they are paid. Otherwise, there is no profit. So part of the value they produce goes back to them as wages. The rest stays with the owner as profit. Here is where Marx and Engels say, this is not a neutral exchange. This is a class relation, because the workers depend on wages to survive. The owner depends on their labor to grow the business. Their interests overlap in some ways, but conflict in others. If wages rise too high, profit shrinks. If profit is pushed too high, wages and conditions fall. This doesn't mean anyone is evil as a person. It means the positions they occupy in the system push them into a certain kind of game. The book's claim is that history is full of these games. When we see new laws about property, new rules about work, new institutions, new cultures, we shouldn't just see progress or decline. We should ask, which class is gaining power here? Which class is losing it? Why is this clever? Because it flips the normal way we talk about politics. Instead of starting with, what do people believe? What values do they hold? It starts with, where do they stand in the material system? How do they get their income? What do they need to protect to feel secure? And then it asks, how might that position shape their beliefs, often without them realizing it? In simple terms, your paycheck quietly whispers ideas to you, not as a conspiracy, not as a cartoon villain, but as a constant pressure. What risks can you afford? What kind of change feels scary to you? What kind feels hopeful? The first idea of the book says, if we ignore class, we miss the deep structure of power. The second core idea we'll focus on is this. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. Let's translate. In any period, there is usually one class that has more power, more control over production, more access to education, more influence over media, culture, and institutions. This class doesn't just rule through money or laws, it also tends to rule through ideas, not by sitting in a room and writing all the slogans, but by being the class whose worldview becomes common sense. Think about it like this. Imagine you live in a town where almost all the big businesses are owned by a small group of families. These families own the main industries, fund schools, museums, and charities, own or sponsor local newspapers and media, support certain kinds of art, research, and stories. Now ask yourself, what kinds of ideas are likely to be praised in this town? What kinds of ideas are likely to be ignored, mocked, or labeled unrealistic? Probably ideas that say, property is sacred, success proves virtue, the existing order is natural, major changes are dangerous, even if people suffer. These ideas may be taught in school books, popular novels, advertisements, speeches, everyday sayings like, "That's just how the world works." People may repeat them sincerely without ever meeting a member of the ruling class. This is what Marx and Engels are pointing to. They say, the class that controls material production also tends to control mental production. Not absolutely, not perfectly, but strongly. In other words, who owns the presses often shapes what gets printed. Who funds the research often shapes what gets studied. Who pays the wages often shapes what can be openly questioned. Again, they are not saying one secret group controls every thought. They are saying, when a class has structural power, its interests slide quietly into everyday truth. This is why they think changing society is not just about changing laws. It's also about questioning the obvious, asking who benefits from certain stories about work, success, poverty, crime, morality, noticing which debates never seem to appear on big stages. To make this very concrete, imagine 3 simple phrases. If someone is poor, they must have made bad choices. People who own a lot must have worked harder than others. There is no alternative to how things are. Now ask, if a society repeats these lines daily, who is protected by them? Whose position is made to look natural and deserved? Core idea number 2 is powerful because it connects material power, who owns what, with cultural power, what seems normal, natural, or moral. It says, power does not always shout. Often, it just defines what counts as common sense. Now let's step into an imaginary world for a few minutes, not to prove a point, but to feel how these ideas might play out. Imagine a town called Riverton. Riverton sits between a river and a highway. For many years, it was small. People fished, farmed, ran tiny shops. One day, a large company builds a factory there. The factory is huge and clean. It promises jobs, growth, and modern life. At first, the town is thrilled. Farmers who struggled with bad seasons find new work on the production lines. Young people who plan to leave now stay. Small businesses open, lunch places, clothing shops, little cafes. The company owns the factory, the housing complex next to it, a logistics center, even a sponsored innovation hub for local education. Soon, most families in Riverton depend on the company in some way. We follow three characters: Anna, a line worker at the factory; Ben, a mid-level manager; Clara, a local journalist. Anna clocks in every day at 7 a.m. Her job is simple, and she's good at it. But the work is fast. There are targets. If she slows down, her supervisor notices. She gets a wage that covers rent, food, and a little extra, if she's careful. Ben, the manager, has a different life. He doesn't own the company, but he runs a whole division. He has performance bonuses. His email is full of targets, graphs, and efficiency reports. Part of his role is to keep costs down, including labor costs. If he fails, someone else might take his place. Clara, the journalist, works at the Riverton Chronicle, the town's main newspaper. Recently, the factory bought a large share of the paper. They don't tell her what to write each day, but there are soft signals. When an article is too negative, she gets comments from her editor. When she writes upbeat pieces about innovation and growth, they get front-page placement. One summer, something changes. The company announces, "To stay competitive, we must increase productivity. This is a tough global market." What this actually means is a small pay freeze. Wages will not rise this year. Slightly longer shifts for some teams. A new flexibility contract for new hires with fewer protections. For Anna, this is big. Her rent just went up. Food prices are higher. She was counting on a raise. In the factory cafeteria, people start to talk. Is this fair? Do we have any power to push back? What happens if we complain? Ben, the manager, feels the pressure too. He didn't decide the policy. It came from higher up. But his job now is to implement the changes smoothly. He hears Anna's complaints in team meetings. He hears upper management saying, "We must maintain investor confidence. Everyone has to do their part." Clara, the journalist, hears rumors. A friend tells her, "People are thinking of organizing, maybe a collective response." Clara considers writing a piece about it. But she remembers the last time she questioned the factory's decisions. Her editor said, "Careful, we don't want to create panic or risk jobs. Be responsible." So instead, Clara writes an article titled, "Riverton Faces New Global Challenges, Sacrifices Today, Stability Tomorrow." She quotes managers. She includes a few worker voices, but only the calmer ones who say, "It's not ideal, but what can we do? At least we have jobs." Weeks pass. The company starts a PR campaign, posters about team spirit, slogans like, "We are one big family," videos about how, together, we can beat the competition. In the town, conversations split. Some workers say, "We should push back. We are doing more for the same pay. This is not right." Others answer, "If we annoy the company, they might move the factory somewhere else. Then we all lose." Ben feels caught. He grew up in a family like Anna's. He remembers his parents struggling. Now his salary depends on keeping costs low and labor relations stable. He tells himself, if we keep the factory healthy, everyone keeps their jobs. This is the least bad option. Clara publishes another article. Experts explain why Riverton must adapt or fall behind. Again, the main voices are people connected to the company or its partners. Months later, something quiet has happened. The new normal is longer hours for some workers, a wage that stretches thinner, a town story that says, "This is what must be done to survive in the modern economy." Some people are angry, some are resigned, many are just tired. Life goes on, the river still flows, the highway still hums. From the outside, Riverton looks fine. Let's pause inside Riverton and put on the lens of the book. What do we see? First, notice the basic class structure. There are owners of the factory. We never even name them, they are far away. Managers, like Ben, who don't own but help run the system. Workers, like Anna, who sell their labor for wages. Marx and Engels would say, "Here we see modern class relations. The owners decide the big direction, whether to cut costs, whether to freeze wages, whether to relocate the factory one day. Managers translate those decisions into local reality. Workers feel them in their daily lives." Second, notice how interests collide. Owners want higher profits, higher competitiveness. Workers want higher wages, secure lives, decent time with their families. Managers want to keep their positions, which depend on keeping owners happy while avoiding open conflict with workers. No one in the story is a cartoon villain, but the structure pushes them into roles. Ben could risk his job to protest, but his mortgage, his family, his status pull him back. Anna could organize resistance, but fear of job loss pulls her back. Clara could do more critical reporting, but ownership pressure and the desire to keep her job shape what she writes. Third, look at the ideas floating around. The factory launches slogans. We are one big family. We must sacrifice together. The newspaper writes about global competition and no alternative. Workers begin to repeat lines like, "At least we have jobs. This is just how the world works now." From the book's perspective, this is exactly how ruling ideas form. The class that controls production also shapes the narratives about what is necessary. The vocabulary people have to describe their own situation, the fears that limit what actions feel possible. Is anyone forcing Anna to believe these slogans? No. But her options are narrow. If she loudly opposes, she risks being isolated or punished. If she stays quiet, life is harder but safer. Under those conditions, certain thoughts feel more realistic than others. Better to be grateful than risk everything starts to sound like wisdom, not fear. Fourth, look at how power hides. On the surface, these are just business decisions, editorial choices, personal compromises. But underneath we see a class that can adjust people's lives with one policy change, a group of workers whose combined labor creates the wealth of the town, a layer of managers and communicators whose jobs depend on aligning with the owner's goals. Marx and Engels might say, in Riverton, power is not just in the boss's office, it is in who owns the factory, in who owns the newspaper, in who has enough savings to risk speaking out, in which ideas get repeated loudly, and which are whispered only in private kitchens. Fifth, notice how history might develop. Maybe tensions grow. Workers start small collective actions. Some managers secretly sympathize. New ideas spread about rights, fairness, and democracy in the workplace. Or maybe people stay divided. Some leave, some adapt, some break. The town slowly forgets that things could be different. From the book's point of view, both paths are part of class struggle. Sometimes it explodes into visible confrontation. Sometimes it stays as a low, constant hum. But the struggle is not just about one policy or one boss. It's about the basic shape of the system. Who decides? Who obeys? Who carries the risks? Who gets most of the rewards? In Riverton, we see both core ideas at work. Class struggle, different groups with different structural interests. Ruling ideas, the owner's needs echoing through media, slogans, and everyday common sense. Now we step out of Riverton and back into our own world. Let's leave aside specific countries, leaders, or parties. Instead, let's sit with a few quiet questions. When you look at your own life, how much of what you believe about success came from your own reflection? How much came from school, media, family, work, from the environment built around you? When you think about work, what do you see as normal hours? What feels like a fair wage? Where did those standards come from? When you watch debates about the economy, which ideas are treated as serious, realistic, responsible? Which ideas are called extreme, naive, dangerous, sometimes before they're even explained? Who decides that? In many societies, there are official freedoms: freedom to speak, freedom to organize, freedom to choose work, and those are important. But the book's lens asks us to add another layer. Freedom for whom? Under what material conditions? With what risks? If someone lives paycheck to paycheck, how free do they feel to challenge their employer? If a media outlet depends on certain advertisers or funders, how free does it feel to question them? If a thinker's career depends on certain institutions, how free do they feel to criticize the foundations of those institutions? These are not questions with easy, single answers. They are invitations to notice that opinions don't float in empty air, that beliefs grow in specific soil, workplaces, neighborhoods, schools, screens, that some ideas are given microphones, others are given silence. And beyond beliefs, what shapes what we pay attention to? Why do some problems get 24-hour coverage while others barely get a paragraph? Why do some forms of suffering feel like temporary bad luck while others are seen as inevitable? Again, no one needs to be plotting in a dark room for this to happen. Marx and Engels would say, if certain classes hold more structural power, the world will naturally be lit from their angle. What they fear will be called dangerous. What they need will be called necessary. What hurts them will be called unthinkable. You don't have to accept this view completely, but letting it sit in your mind can change how you watch the world, almost like adjusting the contrast on a screen. Suddenly you see which voices are always centered, which experiences are always background noise, which solutions are never even considered realistic enough to debate. So what can we, as individual viewers, take from all this? Most of us are not factory owners or famous theorists. We are more like Anna, Ben, or Clara. We live inside systems we did not design. We feel their pressures. We make local choices. Here are a few quiet lessons we might carry. Check the class angle. When you hear a strong opinion about work, wealth, poverty, or how the world works, ask, from which position is this being said? Who gains if this idea spreads? Who loses? This doesn't mean the idea is automatically wrong. It just means you see it in 3 dimensions. Notice your own material position. How do you make a living? Does your income depend on stability, on change, on growth, on cuts? Which kinds of political or economic change feel scary to you? Why? Sometimes we dress our fears in big words like order or freedom, when at the base we are afraid of losing rent money or status. That's human. Being honest about it can make your thinking clearer. Treat common sense as a clue, not a conclusion. When a phrase feels so obvious that it shuts down thought, that's just how it is. Pause. Ask, when did people start thinking this way? Who benefits if this thought is never questioned? Protect spaces for difficult questions. In a world of fast opinions and short attention spans, deep structural questions are uncomfortable. You don't need to become an activist, theorist, or expert, but you can. Read slowly. Listen to people in different positions than yours. Let ideas that challenge you stay in the room a little longer before you reject them. Separate critique from hatred. This book is harsh on systems. It criticizes structures of property, profit, and power. That doesn't require hatred of individuals. You can see that a system creates harms without believing that every person inside it is a monster. That balance, critical but not dehumanizing, is hard. But it's important. Taken together, these lessons don't tell you what to believe. They give you tools to think more clearly about what you're already believing and why. After walking through a book like this, it's easy to feel pulled toward extremes. Some people might say, "This explains everything. The world is just a battle of classes. That's it." Others might say, "This is outdated. The world is too complex. Class is just one small piece." My own position, if I had one, would be quiet and somewhere in the middle. Class is not the only lens. But ignoring it leaves us half blind. This book is sharp, sometimes harsh, sometimes simplified. It was written in a very different time. Some of its predictions were off. Some of its solutions have, in practice, led to heavy problems when applied in the real world. At the same time, many of its questions have not gone away. Why do some people's lives feel so much more secure than others? Why do certain jobs get respect and high pay, while others, often essential, are treated as low skill? Why do economic crises seem to hit those with the least cushion the hardest? You can disagree with the book's answers and still find its questions useful. Maybe that is the most honest way to approach it. Not as a manual, not as a relic, but as a sharp tool to test the stories we live inside. So, where does this leave us? We've slowed down two of the book's main claims. That history is deeply shaped by class struggle. That the ruling class of any age tends to shape the ruling ideas. We've watched those ideas move through an imaginary town. We've turned them back on ourselves, just a little. Now, the real work is not in this video. It's in what happens after it ends. Maybe you close this and go back to your normal life. Work, study, messages, noise. But somewhere in the background, a small question can stay. When you look at your own world, the jobs around you, the prices, the news, the arguments online, how much of what you see is the surface, and how much is the shadow of deeper economic power? If you picked up this book yourself, slowly, with your own eyes, what parts would you find convincing? What parts would you doubt? Where would you push back? And one last question, the one I want to leave hanging in the air. Do you think ideas like these, about class, power, and common sense, still shape our world today? Or have we moved beyond them, more than this book could ever imagine?